Making sure you don't have too much glare on your head. Nope. Alright. Well, you can just look at me. That'd be the best thing.
That will be good.
Good eye line. Well, some people get distracted and either look at the camera. I did an interview with someone not that long ago, and she looked everywhere except the camera and me.
Oh, gee.
And she was so shifty-eyed, which was sort of fitting because she was sort of a shifty person.
Oh, gee.
Well, I guess let's start off talking about how you ended up in Chicago. You were a minister in Chicago. How did you end up in Chicago, coming from Massachusetts?
When I finished high school, I had no intention of going on to college. But a young theology student from Boston University had come to the small church in Ballard Vale that had been closed because they couldn't afford a full-time minister. And his name is Tony Perino, and he organized a young people's baseball team. At the time, I was singing in the Congregational Church choir, and I was forced to make a really very, very serious theological decision about whether I was called to sing in the choir of the Congregationalists or play baseball with the Methodists. And I decided I was really called to play baseball with the Methodists. And Tony Perino became a real force in my life, and among other things, he was the single person in the town who encouraged me to go to college, even though I had virtually all A's in high school. Nobody in high school encouraged me to go to college. He said, "Where are you going to college?" And I said, "Well, I wasn't planning to go. Our family, you work to support the family as long as you're living at home, and then when you get married, you're out on your own." So I was planning to go to work. And he recommended two schools to me from Michigan. I applied to both of them. I got accepted to both of them, and hadn't seen either of them, didn't know very much about either one of them, but based on the catalog, Albion College catalog looked better to me than Alma College catalog did, so I went to Albion. There, I embarked on a liberal arts course with a major in English, and I was planning to be a teacher. And I met a biology professor at Albion, curiously enough, who introduced me to the University of Chicago Divinity School, and said I ought to go and check it out. And she set up a meeting for me with the dean, and the dean and I had an introductory conversation in which, among other things, he put his feet up on his desk and leaned back in his chair and said to me, "Well, Richard Lawrence, what makes you tick?" And I really hadn't thought about what made me tick before. And we had a really engaging conversation. He was black and just somehow made a connection with me that was especially meaningful. I was interested in theology because I was active in the church all my life. Our family has always sung together. We sung spirituals together. Church was one of the things that my mother, who was the active parent in my life, expected of me and of all the other kids. And I decided that the University of Chicago was worth pursuing. So I went to do graduate study at the University of Chicago. My first job after completing divinity school was in Corvallis, Oregon, at Oregon State University. And there I encountered just the fact that in those days, this is 1962, the only black students at Oregon State were football players. And those football players had no social life. And when one of them was invited by a co-ed to go to her house dance, the house mother said, "Over my dead body." And when that was really shared with the Wesley Foundation, the student organization at Oregon State that I was directing at that time. We supported the co-ed and her date in the student newspaper, and there was quite an uproar, including a cross was burned on the lawn of the First Methodist Church where the Wesley Foundation was housed. And so after 2 years there, I decided I was going back to Chicago, going back to the city where there was a lot of literature at the time saying that that was the place where the action was, and my experience at the Divinity School, while largely spent in school, still introduced me to a city that I really was inordinately attracted to. So I went back to Chicago to an inner city campus ministry, and was committed to staying there for as long as I could. So found myself engaged with a number of issues and organizations around economic and interracial justice, and Chicago just struck me as home. So I just decided that's where I was going to stay as long as I could.
In Chicago in the 60s, wasn't it what they call the Birmingham of the North, or the Selma of the North, or something like that? It was very, people don't think of it, don't understand how really segregated that city was for Northern City.
It was, by all research, the most segregated city in the country, which surprises lots of people. Dr. King, when he came to Chicago to try to deal with the segregation, particularly in housing, organized open city marches, as I think you know, open housing marches, and the violent reaction to those was just incredible. His conclusion was that Chicago demonstrated the deepest hatred against people of color of any city he had ever seen or visited. So Chicago was a very, very tough place.
Yeah, that was, I mean, that was where George Lincoln Rockwell was based out of, if I remember correctly, right?
Yes, the anti-open housing marches were the American Nazi Party, and they carried swastikas. They came to marches so violent that the governor would call out the National Guard. The National Guard would protect marches with their bayonets drawn. That's how fierce the feelings were about not permitting blacks to move into white neighborhoods in Chicago.
So that was, and again, when most people talk about civil rights, historically we learn about, what was going on in Alabama and Mississippi and all that sort of stuff. And it sort of amazes me. I mean, when I first started understanding how deeply entrenched these old school, these racial ideologies were in Chicago, I was shocked, and how violent it was. I guess we should sort of just elaborate. I'd like just to elaborate a little bit more about that, because again, this is, the further we get removed from it, the harder it is for people to understand how, I guess maybe a little bit about the history of Chicago and how it became this hotbed of people just